What if I told you that everything you believed in is a lie? We're used to thinking of ancient Rome as a city of marble, laws, and absolute order. Movies show us legionnaires on every corner, protecting the peace of ordinary citizens. But in reality, life in the empire's capital was much more like modern-day Gotham. It was a metropolis of 1 million people, where real monsters took to the streets as soon as the sun went down. By day, Rome was a center of civilization, trade, and great philosophical debates. At night, it turned into a labyrinth of dark alleys without a single streetlight. Sounds scary, doesn't it? Imagine modern-day New York, where the power suddenly went out completely and the entire police force was disbanded. That's exactly what the capital of the greatest empire looked like every night for centuries. Wealthy people never left their homes after sunset without personal guards. Ordinary citizens had to rely solely on luck and very fast feet. But this couldn't go on for long, because chaos threatened the very foundations of power. So Rome created a system of control that was millennia ahead of its time. And today we'll examine exactly how they solved the problem of crime in the world's first metropolis. The Roman Empire grew at an incredible pace, drawing resources from all over the world and transforming into a true giant. Along with gold, exotic goods, and slaves, hundreds of thousands of new people flocked to the capital every day in search of a better life. Very quickly, the city's population surpassed 1 million people, placing a colossal strain on the entire infrastructure. For the ancient world, this was an absolutely unimaginable, record-breaking, and in some ways even frightening figure. To give you an idea of the scale, London did not reach such demographic figures until the 19th century, nearly 2,000 years later. In those days, no one simply knew how to manage such a vast human mass confined to a relatively small area. Rome became the first metropolis in human history, with all the problems and crises that entailed. The city was literally bursting at the seams from overpopulation, a housing shortage, and endless noise. But here lies the main historical mystery and paradox of this vast ancient settlement. The city was gigantic, noisy, and dangerous. Yet it had no regular state police force as we understand it. The ancient people of that time sincerely believed that protecting your own life and property was your personal responsibility. The Romans relied on their own strength, the help of loyal servants, or the support of influential patrons. In those years, the state dealt exclusively with large-scale tasks: global wars, tax collection, and the construction of monumental roads. Catching petty thieves or settling street fights was considered too trivial a matter to warrant the attention of serious magistrates. To modern people, such logic seems like utter madness, anarchy, and an absolute abdication of responsibility by the authorities. We are accustomed to security being part of the basic package of government services, but in Rome, things were different. Imagine for a moment modern-day Chicago or New York, where the police simply refused to respond to any of your calls. If you were robbed in broad daylight or swindled at the market, you had to find the criminal yourself, apprehend him, and personally bring him before a judge. My legs start to ache just thinking about how much I had to run through those dirty alleys chasing criminals. You had to be a detective, a SWAT team member, and a prosecutor all rolled into one to achieve even a shred of justice. At night, these winding alleys turned into the perfect playground for robbers, swindlers, and real-life serial killers. There was no street lighting in Rome, so poor people moved through the city by feel or with tiny torches. The slightest rustle in the darkness could mean mortal danger, and cries for help were usually ignored by indifferent neighbors. The darkness reliably concealed any bloody crimes, and finding real witnesses in this chaos was practically impossible. The situation began to spiral completely out of control when organized street gangs started influencing high-level politics. Ambitious politicians often hired local thugs to intimidate their rivals or forcibly disrupt important public referendums. The streets became a battleground for political showdowns, where clubs and knives were used instead of arguments. The city gradually sank into a state of permanent civil war at the grassroots level. Over time, common thugs became a convenient and very cheap tool of the authorities, and the streets were literally awash in daily violence. Something had to be changed urgently and radically. Otherwise, the great city would simply destroy itself from within in the flames of unrest. The first emperor, Octavian Augustus, realized this in time and decided to act as decisively as possible to save the capital. He understood that without order in the streets, his personal power would always be under threat. Augustus realized that a vast city with a population of millions vitally needed a professional state law enforcement force. But he was a very cautious politician and could not simply call them the police and hand them combat-ready iron swords. Historically, the Romans harbored a deep hatred for the idea of having armed soldiers within the city limits, viewing it as a sign of tyranny. Anyone carrying a weapon in the center of Rome was perceived as an enemy of freedom and an oppressor of the people. So the cunning emperor pulled off a brilliant political maneuver that ultimately worked perfectly and without any unnecessary protests. He officially established a large-scale city fire department, which was also tasked with patrolling the streets at night. Fires were the Romans' greatest fear, so the appearance of such units was met by the public with immense enthusiasm and relief. Under the guise of rescuers, the emperor effectively introduced his own security forces into the city. This new state service was named the Vigils, which literally translates from Latin as the watchman. Initially, it consisted of several thousand strong and disciplined freedmen, organized into specialized militarized cohorts. They lived in barracks, obeyed strict regulations, and received a regular salary from the emperor's personal treasury. These were men who had nothing to lose and who were personally devoted to their new benefactor. Their main official and highly honorable duty was the rapid suppression of fires, which occurred daily in wooden Rome. But during their regular nightly patrols, they inevitably and constantly encountered actual street criminals. Gradually, law enforcement duties began to take precedence over firefighting responsibilities, although the name of the service remained the same. Thus, the ancient firefighters officially became the world's first regular professional night police force. The Vigils walked the dark night streets carrying heavy buckets, sharp axes, and very long, sturdy ropes. At first glance, this sounds like a rather strange and absurd set of tools for combating armed street crime. But in reality, an axe could be used not only to break down burning doors, but also to effectively subdue aggressive nighttime robbers. Heavy buckets and ropes also found their use in apprehending troublemakers. Modern emergency responders also often perform police functions in various dangerous situations. The Romans simply combined these two important professions into a single effective system 2,000 years before our time. They realized that a person who watches for fires can simultaneously ensure that no one breaks the law. This solution saved enormous resources and created an atmosphere of constant government presence in the city. Patrolling the vast city followed a strict and well-thought-out system that closely resembles modern police precincts. All of Rome was logically divided into 14 administrative districts, each of which was now the responsibility of a separate group of vigils. Each group had its own base, its own equipment, and its own area of responsibility, which they knew like the back of their hands. Not a single corner of the city was to remain unmonitored by these night watchmen. They knew every winding street, every dark corner, and every suspicious merchant in their assigned district inside and out. It was classic territorial policing, perfected by the Romans to a truly ideal ancient standard. Modern urban criminologists still consider this system of constant patrolling to be the most reliable and time-tested. The vigils became the emperor's eyes and ears in the poorest and most troubled parts of the city. But here the story gets even more interesting, because the night vigils were only the tip of a massive police iceberg. Roman control over this colossal city was built not only on the brute strength of former slaves wielding axes. The system operated in a much more subtle and complex manner, relying on a profound understanding of the sordid and dark depths of human psychology. The authorities skillfully exploited what has worked flawlessly throughout all historical eras: banal human greed. And the next element of Roman urban security will surprise you greatly. A police force armed with heavy axes is, of course, excellent, but it is simply physically impossible to fully control a city of 1 million people. There were only about 7,000 vigils, which was clearly not enough for all of Rome's endless streets, squares, and markets. Therefore, the ancient authorities decided to actively enlist ordinary citizens themselves to maintain local law and order in residential neighborhoods. It was a strategic decision to win the people over to the side of the law through small privileges. They created a unique system of street micro-magistrates, officially known as vicemagistrates. In essence, these were respected and influential neighborhood elders, chosen from among the most loyal local residents. They were granted certain powers in exchange for information about what was happening within their community. The vicemagistrates served as a link between the common people and the high imperial administration. The vicemagistrates were personally responsible on a daily basis for minor neighborhood disputes, the legality of street vending, and general order on their own street. They never carried heavy weapons and were not professionally trained soldiers or guards. Instead, they knew absolutely every local resident, all their dirty secrets, family quarrels, and daily habits. Not a single suspicious detail in their neighbor's behavior could escape their watchful gaze. If a suspicious stranger suddenly appeared in the neighborhood or some strange problems began, they were the first to find out. Modern concepts of volunteer neighborhood watch groups or neighborhood surveillance programs operate on exactly the same logical principle. The Romans realized that the best defense against crime is when society itself begins to monitor itself. This created an atmosphere in which it became nearly impossible to commit a crime unnoticed. But this was not enough for the Roman authorities. They needed a more rigorous system of total social surveillance. And so they devised a brilliant, though incredibly terrifying, mechanism of state investigation, known as the delator system. Delators were cunning and very dangerous professional informants who officially earned their living by exposing the crimes of others. This was not a secret disgrace. It was a completely legal and highly lucrative activity. If such an informer helped successfully convict a criminal in court, he was legally entitled to a significant portion of the accused person's property. It was an incredibly lucrative and often bloody business that turned ordinary snitching into a prestigious urban profession. Many Romans abandoned their usual occupations to devote their lives to finding dirt on wealthy and careless fellow citizens. The system encouraged betrayal and suspicion at the state level. It sounds gruesome and immoral, but it elegantly solved a massive state problem: the complete lack of professional prosecutors. The state no longer had to spend its money on lengthy investigations into complex financial or convoluted political cases. Greedy and motivated Roman citizens found all the evidence themselves, gathered reliable witnesses, and performed brilliantly in court. The hunt for profit made them work more efficiently than even the most honest investigator. Your neighbor might smile sweetly at you when you met in the morning, only to gleefully write a denunciation against you that very evening for the sake of your country villa. Today, in the world of technology, we call this crowdsourced justice, but the stern Romans simply considered it a normal part of life. Social trust in society was practically non-existent, but the clearance rate for crimes against the state was sky high. Every resident of Rome understood that hundreds of eyes could be watching them at any moment. And this system of mass denunciation was so effective that it soon began to rapidly destroy itself from within. Over time, experienced informants began to band together into full-fledged criminal syndicates dedicated to the systematic destruction of their political rivals. They became a formidable force capable of bringing down even the most influential senator through false accusations. Fear of the informers began to permeate every stratum of Roman high society. They masterfully fabricated false cases against completely innocent wealthy individuals in order to legally plunder their vast accumulated wealth. Some emperors secretly encouraged this lawlessness because the state treasury also received its lawful share of all confiscations. It was an ideal and highly cynical, corrupt judicial scheme, neatly disguised as concern for the security of the great city of Rome. Justice in such courts had long since given way to a simple thirst for profit. The Roman authorities understood perfectly well that relying solely on greedy and unpredictable informants could be deadly dangerous. Therefore, a secret police force known as the enigmatic frumentari operated actively yet with the utmost secrecy within the city. Initially, these men were engaged in the entirely routine and tedious procurement of ordinary grain for the needs of the vast Roman army. No one could have imagined that dangerous agents were hiding behind these humble supply officials, but their constant travels to every corner of the empire naturally turned them into an ideal network of spies, couriers, and informants. Soon they began professionally monitoring high-ranking officials, catching enemy spies, and even opening other people's private letters. They became the emperor's personal secret service, operating outside the bounds of ordinary law and regulations. Even those who held high positions in the government feared them. The frumentari always wore the most ordinary clothes and stood out no way at all in the motley city crowd. They sat quietly in port taverns, listened intently to others' conversations in the markets, and carefully gathered any rumors and gossip. Imagine modern undercover agents who today pose as ordinary food delivery couriers or simple porters. They were everywhere and nowhere at the same time, remaining the invisible guardians of imperial peace. If you spoke too loudly or carelessly against the reigning emperor in a bar, unexpected guests might show up at your home the next day. The methods of gathering secret information have remained fundamentally unchanged over the past 2,000 years. The Romans were the first to realize that information is the most powerful weapon in governing vast masses of people. Covert control worked far more effectively than open threats or displays of force in public squares. Interestingly, this entire massive and complex police security apparatus operated very unevenly throughout the city. The city was strictly divided into invisible social zones with vastly different levels of state care and protection. In some neighborhoods, life was worth a fortune, while in others it was worth absolutely nothing. The system was designed to protect, first and foremost, those who paid taxes and supported the government. The authorities didn't even try to make the entire vast city of Rome equally comfortable and safe for absolutely all categories of residents. Police and intelligence resources were always directed exclusively to where the most important and fabulously wealthy people lived. The poor neighborhoods were left to fend for themselves until something truly large-scale and dangerous began there. And this brings us to the most striking and brutal social contrast of the entire ancient criminal world. Patrols of armed vigilantes made their rounds through the pristine, stately neighborhoods with their marble villas every hour, carefully checking every dark corner. But in the vast capital, there were entire districts where even experienced police patrols tried never to venture without absolute necessity. Their own laws reigned there, and the emperor's authority was merely a formality on paper. It was a veritable urban jungle where only the most cunning, swift, or brutal survived. The Roman police operated on the principle of strictly minimizing any risk to their own small number of officers. If a poor neighborhood was deemed too dangerous, it was simply left to stew in its own criminal juices and problems. It was a cruel, yet very pragmatic and understandable logic of survival for the authorities in an ancient, overpopulated metropolis. Order was a luxury accessible to far from every resident of the Eternal City. This sharp class division created two completely different realms that existed in absolute parallel. In one, people elegantly recited poetry and strolled safely among marble statues under the reliable personal protection of bodyguards. In the other, ordinary people literally fought every evening for their own physical survival and a piece of bread. To understand just how different these two worlds were, we need to take a closer look at them. Let's descend to the very bottom of the great city and examine its true dark side. If you genuinely wanted to get yourself into deadly trouble in ancient Rome, you went straight to the Subura district. It was the most densely populated, incredibly filthy, and criminally active area, located right in the heart of the imperial capital. It was here in a labyrinth of narrow alleys that the cheapest brothels, seedy taverns, and hidden lairs of dangerous gangsters were located. Subura never slept, filling the night with screams, the clang of weapons, and the suspicious whispers of conspirators. The streets here were so crooked, tangled, and narrow that the saving sunlight almost never reached the ground. Even at noon, a damp twilight reigned in the low-lying parts of the district, creating the perfect atmosphere for shady dealings and robberies. The stench of open sewage flowing directly down the cobblestones constantly mingled with the pungent aromas of cheap garlic sauce and sour wine. It was a heavy, suffocating smell of poverty that clung tenaciously to the clothes of anyone who dared to venture here. Patrolling vigils only visited Subura in very large groups, always keeping their heavy axes and clubs at the ready. Sending a lone patrolman into these back alleys was tantamount to an immediate death sentence by a brutal and swift beating. The local, hardened residents, accustomed to a brutal struggle for resources, settled all their internal disputes themselves, often with the help of lightning-fast knife fights. In such places, the emperor's law ended where the first unlit alleyway began. It was a classic, hopeless ghetto that the state had simply physically and socially isolated from decent, civilized society. The authorities understood that it was impossible to establish perfect order here, so they simply tried to keep the chaos from spreading beyond the district's borders. Modern Brazilian favelas, or the slums of megacities, operate under exactly the same unspoken and brutal laws of forced social isolation. The Subura was a state within a state, where the law of the jungle always took precedence over any law written on parchment. The most surprising thing is that the dirty and noisy Subura was located literally in the lowlands, right beneath the elite and majestic Roman hills. It was a perfect visual metaphor for the structure of the ancient world. The poor were literally wallowing in the stinking mud below, while the elite towered above them. Houses in the lowlands were built en masse from the cheapest wood, straw, and fragile, poorly fired clay bricks. Homeowners skimped on everything, trying to squeeze the maximum profit out of every square centimeter of this expensive land. These massive multi-story residential blocks, called insulae, were constantly burning due to careless handling of fire and regularly collapsing. The walls creaked under their own weight, bearing dozens of families beneath them who simply had nowhere else to go. The life of an ordinary working person or small artisan in this god-forsaken district was worth practically nothing. Death here was a common occurrence, and a collapsed house was merely a temporary inconvenience for the wealthy landowner. Now let's imagine climbing just a few hundred meters up a steep, verdant slope. We immediately find ourselves on the exclusive Palatine Hill, where powerful senators, wealthy merchants, and the great emperors themselves once lived. Here the air seemed cleaner, the sky closer, and every stone a reminder of unparalleled grandeur and boundless wealth. All the streets on the hill were incredibly wide, perfectly clean, and neatly paved with expensive white stone that glistened in the sun. Even late at night, oil lamps and safe torches on iron stands always burned brightly around the huge, luxurious private villas. The contrast between the upper and lower cities was so stark and shocking that it felt as if you had suddenly been transported to a completely different planet. There was no stench or noise here, only the quiet rustling of fountains and enclosed courtyards and the singing of exotic birds in the gardens. The Palatine was a symbol of stability and absolute security that only the select few could afford. The state police were almost nowhere to be seen here, but not because this elite district was defenseless against the outside world. It was simply that every incredibly wealthy Roman owned his own small private army of loyal and trained guards. Dozens of huge, burly gladiator slaves stood guard at the doors around the clock and accompanied their master in tight, multi-row formations during his walks. These men were ready to kill anyone at the very first sign from their master, without waiting for authorization from the authorities. If some fool or desperate man tried to attack a senator, he would simply be torn to pieces on the spot. Why waste time calling the state police when you have a personal squad of professional, trained killers at your disposal? Having such a guard was not only a matter of security, but also an important element of high social status in Rome. The more bodyguards followed their master's litter, the more weight his word carried in the Senate and in the Forum. Today's wealthy businessmen hire private security firms and bodyguards for precisely the same reasons of personal safety. The Romans simply did it with stunning ancient grandeur, massive budgets, and maximum ostentatious public brutality. The private armies of rival senators often engaged in massive street battles with one another during heated political elections. The streets of elite neighborhoods would sometimes turn into battlefields, where it was decided which faction would dictate the terms to the city. The law on the Palatine Hill was dictated not by the official Roman court, but solely by the number and size of your personal armed guard. Money easily bought basic security, and a great deal of money ensured the owner virtually absolute lifelong immunity. Bailiffs were simply afraid to approach the villas of those who could field 100 sword-wielding professionals against them. It was a system where wealth created its own law, operating parallel to the state's. At the same time, poor neighborhoods were completely left to fend for themselves, and brazen gang racketeering flourished there. Local criminal gangs forced small merchants to pay huge sums for protection from these very same aggressive gangs. Sounds very familiar and modern, doesn't it? This is a classic and rather banal mafia scheme, which the famous Italian mafia perfected only 1,000 years later. The Romans certainly didn't invent organized crime from scratch, but they definitely took it to a whole new, systematic level. The gangs had their own hierarchy, their own territories of influence, and even their own corrupt connections within the city administration. Small shopkeepers in Subura knew that if they didn't pay on time, their shop would be burned to the ground the very next night. The state couldn't offer them protection, so they were forced to pay off those who kept the entire neighborhood in fear. The vigil officers knew all the criminal bosses who ruthlessly controlled the local markets by sight and by name. But total corruption permeated the entire administrative system of the ancient metropolis, from top to bottom, like poison. It was far more profitable for police chiefs to accept regular, generous bribes than to carry out dangerous, bloody raids in the dark slums. Why risk the lives of their men when they could simply take a cut from the illegal gambling business or brothels? Therefore, the imperial authorities often turned a blind eye to petty crime, provided it did not directly threaten the existing state order. The system reliably maintained a fragile working balance between absolute street chaos and total police control over the city. As long as the gangsters only robbed the poor in Subura and didn't encroach on Palatine, their existence was considered a tolerable evil. It was a cynical deal that allowed the authorities to save resources on managing the underclass. This cynical policy of containment allowed the vast and volatile city to function without constant, large-scale bloody uprisings. Street crime was a kind of unspoken social tax that society regularly paid for critical overpopulation. The emperors understood perfectly well that it was simply physically impossible to completely and permanently eradicate crime in such a gigantic city. For every gang that was driven out, 2 new ones would immediately take their place, even hungrier and more vicious. So they simply herded it into criminal reservations like the filthy, dangerous, and incredibly noisy Subura, creating exclusion zones there. The authorities' main demand was simple: that the stinking filth from below never soil the snow-white expensive togas of the respected patricians. As long as crime remained confined to the slums, it was merely background noise in the great empire. But sometimes there were lapses in the system, and then it was time for punitive measures. But what happened when a foolish or careless criminal was caught red-handed at the scene of a brazen crime? The ancient justice system knew absolutely nothing of words like humanity, compassion, or the basic rights of any individual. All punishments were carefully designed to instill uncontrollable, animalistic fear in the rest of the city's inhabitants. The Romans believed that only the terror of retribution could keep the crowd from committing new atrocities. The Roman state machinery of pain operated with incredible speed, extreme cruelty, and always as publicly as possible for all spectators. And the way they typically treated those found guilty still shocks our modern imagination with its sophistication. Punishment was meant to be not merely just, but a vivid lesson for everyone who witnessed its consequences. This was the core doctrine of the Roman legal system: order through public violence. Ancient Rome had absolutely no faith in a system of correctional institutions or the long-term psychological rehabilitation of captured criminals. The classical prison, as we understand it today, was used there only for the very brief, temporary detention of people awaiting trial. No one in their right mind was going to feed and clothe a criminal for years at the expense of the precious imperial treasury. Prison was considered a place of waiting, not a place for the rehabilitation of a person who had made a mistake. If the court found you guilty, physical punishment followed immediately and was as painful and humiliating as possible for the convicted person. The modern concept of lenient, humane justice would have seemed to the stern Romans an incredibly foolish and dangerous weakness leading to ruin. They believed that a criminal should suffer exactly as much as his victim had suffered, and perhaps even several times more. For a Roman, mercy toward a lawbreaker was tantamount to injustice toward an honest citizen. Petty pickpockets were usually flogged very publicly and deliberately cruelly in the nearest square, so that all the neighbors could witness the process. And this was far from a light disciplinary flogging, but a real brutal beating with special whips until deep, bloody wounds appeared. If a foolish thief was caught by the guards a second time, they could permanently chop off the hand of his working right arm right in front of the crowd. The man was deprived not only of the ability to steal, but also of the ability to work fully, becoming a living reminder of the law. The state's logic was terrifyingly simple and clear to anyone. If a person has no hand, he will have nothing left with which to steal another's property. Society deliberately maimed people, creating a vast army of disabled individuals who could then do nothing but beg pitifully for alms on the steps of temples. These unfortunate souls were better advertisements for Roman justice than any of the emperor's decrees posted on the walls. Looking at a man without an arm, everyone understood the price of attempting to take what did not belong to them. For more serious, heinous crimes, such as premeditated murder or arson committed at night, the punishments were invariably capital. Convicted arsonists were often publicly burned alive, applying the ancient principle of absolute tit-for-tat retribution for the evil they had committed. It was believed that fire should purge the city of those who themselves had used flames to bring destruction and chaos. It was a spectacle that permanently deterred all spectators from ever playing with fire again. Convicted murderers could easily be thrown to wild, hungry beasts in the vast arena of the Colosseum for the bloody entertainment of the jaded crowd. Any execution in Rome immediately turned into a grand theatrical spectacle with tens of thousands of screaming and applauding spectators. The state literally sold expensive tickets to witness the brutal physical destruction of the most notorious violators of Roman law. The criminal's death became part of the entertainment, uniting citizens in an act of collective condemnation. Sounds crazy and savage, doesn't it? But for the harsh, ancient world, this was by no means just a bloody sport or the perversion of a few individuals. It was the most powerful and effective tool of mass psychological intimidation for a vast and unmanageable city of millions. When every poor person saw with their own eyes how a criminal's flesh was torn apart by lions, they thought 1,000 times before committing a theft. Animal intimidation worked far better than thousands of armed patrols on the dark, winding streets of Subura. For crimes against the state itself or treason, the most terrible and shameful punishment was applied: prolonged crucifixion. This incredibly agonizing public execution was specifically designed so that the condemned person would suffer for as long as possible. The broken and battered body was deliberately left hanging on a wooden cross along the main roads for several long, sweltering days. Passers-by could hear the dying man's moans and witness his slow agony under the scorching sun. It was a living, moaning billboard, loudly proclaiming that the imperial power would never tolerate rebels and traitors. This is precisely why any large-scale slave uprisings were always suppressed with such demonstrative and extreme historical cruelty. The authorities wanted the memory of the punishment to be passed down from generation to generation as a warning. The thousands of crosses along the Appian Way were the most vivid textbook on Roman public law. Wealthy and influential citizens, unlike the powerless commoners, were always judged by entirely different, more lenient and respectful rules. A respected senator or a wealthy equestrian would never have been thrown into a filthy arena to face hungry bears for the amusement of a roaring crowd. They were usually politely offered a very comfortable alternative: voluntary exile from Rome with partial confiscation of their accumulated wealth. Exile was considered a severe loss of status, but it still allowed the person to keep their life and some of their wealth. If a wealthy person's crime was purely political, they were nobly permitted to end their life with dignity and in quiet, surrounded by their family. Justice in ancient Rome was truly blind only to those who had absolutely no money or connections. For the elite, there were lawyers, bribes, and the opportunity to strike a deal with the judges before the trial began. Equality before the law in those days was a utopian dream that had nothing to do with reality. Trials of influential, wealthy individuals more closely resembled expensive theatrical performances by the most famous and talented actors. Lawyers hired for enormous sums of money would dramatically tear at their clothes, bring in the defendants' weeping children, and loudly appeal for mercy. As we study this paradoxical and frightening system, we suddenly begin to understand something incredibly important about our own modern times. It turns out that Rome's brutal methods of solving social problems have not remained in the distant and forever forgotten ancient past. Today, we are debating exactly the same fundamental ideas, fiercely arguing about the limits of security in our massive metropolises. The problems of overpopulation, control, and crime remain relevant despite all technological advances. Take a look at the heated political debates today regarding the role of the police in the United States or in European countries. You will be incredibly surprised at how much the arguments on both sides still resemble what happened in ancient Rome thousands of years ago. Questions about how to maintain order while preserving freedom have no simple or straightforward answers. Let's jump from ancient times straight to the present day and examine these startling historical parallels. Today in the US, there are incredibly heated public debates about exactly how the police should operate. Some politicians are demanding an immediate increase in funding and a significant ramp-up of armed patrols on city streets. Other activists are chanting slogans calling for the police to be completely disbanded or at least drastically downsized. It sounds like a radically new and very modern political agenda, doesn't it? In fact, the great city of Rome went through exactly the same kind of massive social crises 1,000 years ago. When the Romans first created the vigils, they wisely combined the functions of firefighting and law enforcement. Today, activists in the US are actively proposing to transfer some police calls to social workers and regular medical personnel. They rightly believe that heavily armed cops should not respond to calls involving simple psychological crises. The Romans originally entrusted patrol duties to firefighters to slightly reduce the overall level of aggression on the streets at night. Both of these systems strive to strike a delicate balance between brute force and social assistance for their citizens. Rome's age-old problem of uneven policing hasn't gone away in our advanced 21st century either. In the wealthy green suburbs of American cities, the level of actual safety is always several times higher than average. The police respond almost instantly there, and the streets are well lit and equipped with smart surveillance cameras. In poor neighborhoods, police patrols appear much less frequently, and they are inherently much more aggressive. The geography of street safety in modern New York is eerily similar to the ancient division between the Suburra and the wealthy Palatine. Private security firms are currently experiencing an incredible commercial boom across developed nations. Tech billionaires are hiring former military special forces operatives to patrol their gated elite communities around the clock. This is a direct historical parallel to the Roman system of personal armed gladiators protecting wealthy senators. When the state law enforcement system fails, people with deep pockets simply buy themselves a separate set of laws. Rome long ago proved that the privatization of security always leads to a catastrophic rise in social inequality. The use of secret informants and paid informers in modern criminal investigations follows ancient patterns. U.S. police routinely offer criminals favorable deals in exchange for valuable information about cartels. This is a thoroughly modern version of the Roman delators, who happily turned in their rivals for their own financial gain. The system still relies heavily on human vices to solve the most complex systemic crimes. Only modern surveillance technologies change, while the underlying sordid human psychology remains absolutely unchanged. Roman night watchmen very often used excessive physical force simply because no one was controlling them. The problem of modern police brutality today has the same deep systemic roots of absolute impunity. When the government fully delegates a monopoly on violence to someone, it always risks losing control over it. In ancient times, poor people were beaten with axes. Today, the police use rubber batons and powerful stun guns. The essence of police abuse of power remains the same, despite the development of human rights institutions around the world. However, Rome's most important lesson lies in understanding the nature of mass urban street crime itself. Even the most brutal punishments and gruesome public executions failed to make the ancient city safe. Today, the United States has the highest per capita incarceration rate in the world. But lengthy prison sentences do nothing to solve the problem of street crime in the most disadvantaged neighborhoods. A primal fear of punishment only works when a person truly has something to lose in life. The Roman imperial model of police control was aimed exclusively at protecting the elite and the state itself. Ordinary working people were merely expendable resources that had to be kept in strict order. Contemporary critics of the American justice system boldly assert exactly the same thing about our present day. They openly state that the system protects capital while completely ignoring the real problems of poor, marginalized communities. Human history does not merely repeat itself in a banal way. It literally goes around in the same vicious circle. We look down on Roman methods and think with great relief about how barbaric they were. We sincerely condemn public floggings, bloody gladiatorial combat, and gruesome mass executions. Yet at the same time, we continue to build megacities that are gravely afflicted by the very same social ills. We are still naively trying to solve the problem of widespread poverty with armed patrols on the streets. The ancient Romans would be very surprised at how incredibly little progress we have made. They would look with interest at our shiny police cars, digital radios, and body cameras. Then they would look at the alarming crime rates in some areas of modern developed megacities. And most likely, they would simply smile ironically at our incredibly naive confidence in progress. Technology has changed beyond recognition, but human nature itself has remained exactly the same. Just think about that the next time you read the news about crime in your city. Rome was the very first city to face street crime on such an incredibly massive scale. They boldly experimented, made huge mistakes, and displayed both acts of cruelty and brilliant engineering at the same time. The vigil system was certainly not perfect. It was corrupt, very brutal, and class-based. But it worked well enough to keep the world's greatest empire from collapsing from within. For this, we owe the ancient Romans a debt of gratitude, as they laid the foundation for urban public safety once and for all. By carefully studying their ancient mistakes, we can much better understand our own complex modern problems. True urban safety does not begin with the number of armed guards at every dark intersection of a metropolis. It begins only where ordinary people no longer need to break the law to survive. The police can effectively put out the fires of street violence, but they are completely incapable of eliminating their root cause. This is the most important historical lesson that the great Rome never learned throughout its long history. Perhaps someday we will finally be able to build a city where basic safety is accessible to absolutely everyone. Until then, we will all have to balance daily between fragile order and encroaching street chaos. Thank you for watching this video to the end, and never forget to boldly question established facts. Like this video if you enjoyed our little journey through the dark alleys of the ancient capital. See you in the next episode, where we'll once again turn familiar history upside down.